So maybe we start. The time is already 11:04. Okay, so we'd like to start. Thank you, everybody, to get together in this hall. So we are now going to start sub-theme 5, social protection in society. 11 is can contributory pension enhance income replacement in emerging Asia Pacific of this session. So we'd like to start with the presentation with Professor Philip O'Keefe. Yeah. He's a professor of practice and director of the Aging Asia Research Hub, ALC Center of Excellence in Population Aging Research, CEPA, University of New South Wales. He's from the neighboring country, Australia. So he's going to talk on the title of Expanding Coverage of Contributory Pension Systems, Challenges, Innovations, and Ways Forward. So, Philip, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Reiko. Good morning, everybody, and thank you to the organisers for inviting me. As Reiko said, I'll be talking. Yesterday we talked, John and others on the panel talked about social pensions, which is a very, a growing and important part of the pension system across Asia. And today we'll focus on the more traditional, if you like, systems, the contributory systems. Next slide, please. I'll start, because you may fall asleep by the end of my presentation, with some of the key messages. First is, if we look at the various dimensions of pension systems, that expanding coverage of pension systems, contributory pension systems in the region, I think as all of you know from your own countries, has proved really a major challenge, and particularly for informal workers and women. And my message there would be, there's no silver bullet, there's no magic bullet there. As long as you have high informality in your economies, it's going to be difficult to get quite where you would like to go. So I'll suggest towards the end a layered approach to pension systems, which I think might at least get us further along. Secondly is on adequacy of benefits. And what we find, there's a lot of variation here across the region, but it's frequently a problem, but for a variety of reasons, which I'll go into further. So even when people are so-called covered, often the benefits they get at the other end of their life are inadequate. And finally, fiscal sustainability, which I know many of you worry about. We've got people from planning commissions, ministries of finance and the like, so we all worry about that. That's primarily a problem of defined benefit schemes at this stage in most of these systems, and particularly of civil service schemes in a subset of the countries. So that's the story on coverage, adequacy and sustainability. But, and this is where we kind of look ahead a bit, firstly, I'd like to discuss what I'm calling low-hanging fruit about expanding contributory systems, particularly with the expansion of digitisation, fintech and the like. Secondly, I'd like to review a few schemes which we'll then talk about in more depth in the presentations, further presentations, on schemes for informal workers, different types of contributory schemes for them, and how they do hold promise, but so far they're going nowhere near far enough to cover these major coverage gaps that we see. And finally, on adequacy itself, I'll suggest a number of areas where I think improvements can be made, but some structural things remain, structural challenges remain. Next slide, please. So firstly, just as a kind of broad overview, I've got that picture, which you probably don't understand at the bottom there. When I pulled up alphabet soup, that was one of the pictures I got from Google Images. And when you describe pension systems, it often sounds like an alphabet soup. There's all kinds of acronyms and it can be very confusing. But at a general level, first thing to say is that Asia Pacific has the most diverse set of structures of contributory pension systems of any region in the world. If you look at Latin America, Middle East, Africa, Eastern Europe, there's differences, but they're a lot less pronounced than they are in this region, where you get major differences in design, coverage, and other things. And part of the reason for that is different historical legacies. You have former Commonwealth countries, former French colonies, former Soviet republics, those with a socialist legacy and the like. So there's a host of reasons why that diversity is there. And the second general point to make is that the maturity of these schemes across the region varies enormously. And given that you've got to contribute across a whole lifetime, whether this is a brand new scheme and it'll only help you in 40 years' time, or whether it's a 100-year-old scheme, makes a big difference. So we see enormous variation again there, from schemes that are really, were founded in the 50s or sometimes even earlier, to schemes that were only founded in the late 1990s or even in the 2000s, or in some cases haven't even been started yet. So those two things I'd like you to keep in mind for the diversity we see in the region. Now, this is where it becomes alphabet soup, so let me not go into too much detail here, and you'll see the country examples of each type. But in terms of the broad scheme for the private sector, formal private sector primarily, we have a mixture of classic defined benefit pay-go schemes, which many of you are familiar with. Then there's a whole subset, and that's primarily East Asia, Southeast Asia. Then we have a whole subset of countries that have either provident funds or defined contribution schemes of different forms, often former Commonwealth colonies. We have a much smaller set with what's called notional defined contributions, which at the front end look like a defined contribution scheme, but are actually a pay-go scheme. And they were introduced primarily in former Soviet countries in response to the collapse of their pension systems after the breakup of the Soviet Union. And then we have multi-pillar schemes. China is probably the biggest example in the region, but India, some of the Central Asian countries and others. And then finally, the saddest story at the bottom is that in Myanmar, we have a legislated private sector scheme, but it's not yet activated. And in Bangladesh, we have a tiny, tiny one that was started in 2023, but is really, at this point, not really covering the private sector at any scale. The other source of diversity is civil service pensions. About a third of the countries, if we look right across Asia Pacific, have separate civil service schemes, typically very generous, typically fiscally unsustainable. But about 2/3 now have either integrated schemes for private sector and public sector workers, or are in the process of transitioning, China and Vietnam being examples of that. And then finally, and we'll mention this more, we have these dedicated schemes for the informal sector. Next slide, please. So that's the alphabet soup. The rest of it is less alphabet soup, I hope. So if we look first at coverage, you see here, this is the coverage of contributory pension schemes in the various countries that we're looking at. This is as a percentage of working age population. And when we say coverage, this is not those receiving benefits, this is those contributing to the scheme currently. So those currently working who are contributing. If you put to the side those on the right who are high income countries, other than Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, and I think primarily because of their Soviet legacy, you have coverage that is less than 50% across the region, and then you see in countries like Cambodia, Bangladesh, Nepal, absolutely minimal coverage. But really, it's a pretty incomplete story, if you want to be diplomatic, or a pretty depressing story, actually, if you want to be more direct. The other thing to say is that if I'd showed you this picture 10 or 20 years ago, for most of these countries, it wouldn't have looked much different. So most of them haven't made a lot of progress in the last couple of decades in expanding that coverage. Some have. China is one. But even those that also have, Vietnam is another, Thailand is another, but it's rather minimal. And as you see, they still remain well below the majority of working age population covered by schemes. So this is headline coverage. If we look at active coverage, those who are actually contributing, not just members of schemes, those numbers would be even lower. Next slide, please. Now, John showed this picture yesterday, but I think to me, I find it quite compelling that it's no surprise that when you have very high informality in the labour market, which is, so the more informal you are, the more you move to the right-hand side, your coverage is low. And that's a really strong relationship, not just in this region, but across the world. It's, you know, for economists, the R squared on that relationship is about 88%. So it's really, and you don't get numbers like that, correlations like that very often in economics. And then you see it more simply expressed here in East Asia Pacific, that almost 80% of workers are not in a social security contributory scheme. In South Asia, that number is closer to 90%. And it mimics, or it mirrors, the degree of informality in the economies. Next slide, please. If we switch then to adequacy, so that was coverage, and it's a somewhat unhappy story for many countries so far. Here it's a bit more of a mixed picture. For those who have defined benefit kind of pay-go schemes, in general they're achieving, at least by design, reasonable adequacy. And when I say reasonable, that's 40 to 50% replacement rate of the wages of workers, which is ILO's kind of measure. That replacement is often much higher for civil servants. It can be 70, 80, 90%. Adequacy is more commonly a problem in defined contribution schemes, we find across the region. But for both type of schemes, so it's by design in the case of defined contribution, and it's by default, if you like, in the case of defined benefit, we find that actually adequacy is a lot lower than it should be in the defined benefit countries, and often quite low in the defined contribution countries. And that's for a variety of reasons, different reasons or different mixes of reasons in different countries. For some countries, the contribution rates are simply too low. Korea, Thailand, Indonesia, with the contribution rates that are in place, even if you contribute across your whole life, you're going to have a fairly modest pension. It's just money in, money out, and time. But for both defined contribution and defined benefit, the more or very common problem is active contributors are a lot lower than headline contributors. You see the picture here in green for the case of Indonesia, India and Malaysia, that in those countries about 50% in Indonesia and Malaysia are active contributors. That means they've contributed once at least in the previous year. And in India, that's about a fifth. So the situation of active contributions is
setengah.
the other one is what they call density. So that's even if you're actively contributing at least once a year, you're not contributing 12 months in the year. So in Vietnam, for example, active contributors contribute about 7 months a year on average. So you can see even if by design you're meant to have a high replacement rate, in practice you're going to get whatever that is, 2/3 of that. In defined contribution, the problems are early withdrawal rules. You can withdraw for a whole host of reasons, and then of course the money's gone by the time you get to retirement. And then other reasons. In some countries, historically, in Pacific countries, for example, low investment returns on the things, and also a failure to index benefits, that is to keep up, after retirement with the pace. The other general point to make, and it's in pink to catch your attention, is that adequacy for women tends to be much lower, and I'll have a slide on that later. Next slide, please. That was the kind of situation, and still is the situation, but COVID made it worse in most countries. Many of the countries in the region use special provisions for the crisis to allow people to withdraw early, to allow them not to contribute for a period. A whole host of measures were taken. And now, of course, that helped a lot at the time, no doubt about it, in a crisis. But the long-term effects of that are quite pronounced. Malaysia is one country I know a bit better. They lost 15% of their total revenues from their Provident Fund just in a 1.5 year period because they had a whole series of special withdrawals. So just to say, this adequacy problem that was already there, COVID exacerbated in many of the countries that use this approach. Next slide. Finally, fiscal sustainability, and here there really is a difference. Defined contribution schemes by design shouldn't imply a fiscal risk. You're putting money in, you're getting your money back with a return when you retire. It's slightly different where you give a guaranteed minimum benefit and things like that. That can dilute that that fiscal neutrality that defined contribution schemes have. The bigger problem is in defined benefit schemes, where essentially the promises made to people and the pensions given are not sustainable. On the right there, you see these are a little old, but I think the numbers still largely hold. This is the increase in costs of public pension schemes in a number of countries with defined benefits. And you see in a country like Vietnam, that's going to be 5 percentage points more of public spending than it already is of GDP. And you see for all the other countries. So there's a lot of fiscal pressure from the defined benefit schemes, typically in most countries. And often where there's a civil service scheme that's more generous, that's made much more pronounced by the civil service scheme. Examples of that, Sri Lanka and Pakistan are extreme examples of that, but any country that has a separate civil service scheme will tend to have a higher fiscal pressures in their system. Next slide, please. Finally, the gender lens on pension design. As I mentioned, for various reasons, women have both lower coverage and lower adequacy in pension systems across the region. It's for a variety of reasons. Firstly, as we've seen in many of the presentations, women's participation in the market economy is lower, their wages are lower, they're more likely to be informal, they contribute less, etc. And as a result, lower adequacy, lower coverage. There's a number of things there that I won't go into, which are measures that can help with that. Some of them relate to survivor benefits, some of them relate to benefits of the women themselves. Next slide, please. So moving ahead to kind of how do we improve the situation. Next slide, please. Firstly, this is informal contributory systems, the low-hanging fruit. And here, countries think this is easy, but it's hard. Self-employed, business owners, workers in small enterprises. Essentially, it's workers who have the characteristics of formal employment, but are not formal employees in a legal sense or in a social security sense. Gig workers are the one we hear about all the time here. There are some interesting examples from Gojek in Indonesia, from Grab in Malaysia, and from India, which actually has a tax on gig platforms, which is used or going to be used to finance old age support for gig workers. So there are, I wouldn't say solutions, but there are approaches there. Often the contribution rate, sometimes anyway, for those gig workers can be lower to incentivise them. And then there's a whole host of other things, some related to compliance. It's remarkable in most countries how even very formal enterprises are under contributing and under reporting. So that's the low-hanging fruit. Next slide, please. The more, I guess, next layer of the onion is for informal sector workers. And here we've had a proliferation of matching informal worker schemes. They're usually parallel schemes for the informal sector. They're usually DC, but some are DB or hybrid, like in China. And the targeting varies. It may be anybody from the informal sector who wants to contribute, or it may be targeted, and they're usually government operated. Next slide, please. The methods they use, now obviously informal workers are reluctant. So the first and primary one is the financial incentive, a matching on their contribution. The matching in this region varies from 10% of their contribution to 100% in Korea, for example. So that's a powerful incentive if you're getting one-on-one for your contribution. The second is bundling of pension products with others that are short-term products, because people have myopia. So it may be health insurance, it may be life or funeral insurance, it may be maternity benefits, or a whole host of other things. And then in terms of implementation, there's a whole host of things that are done to make it easier, simpler, more flexible for informal sector workers to contribute. And a lot of that relies on digitisation, partnerships with mobile workers, worker associations and other things, complemented by public information and financial literacy things. One general point I would make is in blue on the right, is that a number of countries have chopped and changed a lot in the design of these schemes, and there's nothing that will undermine confidence and trust in these schemes more than changing them all the time, because clearly the informal sector won't have the confidence that the the scheme will deliver to them in 30 or 40 years' time. Next slide. So far, I would say it's a glass half full, glass half empty story here. You see there the informal scheme working age participation or working age population coverage is pretty low in the ones I've listed, with the exception of Rwanda, interestingly. I put it there because it's a kind of bit of a world beater on this, even though it's a very poor economy. But as a share of the existing formal coverage, sometimes even those low numbers translate into quite high shares of the existing formal coverage. So in India, 2/3 of the existing formal coverage. In Thailand, over half. One scheme, and it's a bit of a star in the region, is China. China, the blue line is the formal scheme, so they've expanded there. But the informal scheme is this orange line, and you see this massive jump in China. It's an interesting scheme that will be talked about in the next presentation. It's a hybrid scheme. It's unique in the world, to my knowledge, and you'll hear more about it in a moment. So China and Korea are probably the star performers in this expansion of coverage to the informal sector, but both use financial incentives and both use other methods. Next slide, please. Finally, I'd like to talk about one. I realise I'm running short of time. This is really cutting edge. This doesn't exist anywhere in the public pension schemes at the moment, but it does exist in the private sector in Mexico, in Spain, in China, and in my own country, and in other developed countries. Essentially, this is, let's forget about people's incomes. Let's just say that everybody consumes. We're all buying stuff all the time, whatever it is. And more we're buying stuff through digital means, tapping cards or our phones or whatever. What this does is it takes a micro contribution every time you buy something. So I buy a coffee, it rounds it, it costs $4, it rounds it up to $5, and that extra dollar goes to my pension savings. Or it's a fixed contribution. You can design it in different ways, but essentially it's point of sale micro contributions that add up over time and give you at the end of, and are invested along the way, and give you then some kind of retirement income at the end of that. I think it's a really interesting one. I think it has a huge future, but as yet it's not in any public schemes in the region. Next slide, please. On adequacy, I realise I'm out of time, so I won't go into all this, but for some countries it's about indexation. A lot of countries in this region don't index benefits in retirement, so they lose their real value over time due to inflation. Lump sum benefits are a big problem. People get all their money in a lump sum and it's gone a few years later. In the Pacific, I've been to a few parties where people have collected their lump sums, and they've been wonderful parties, but there's been nothing left of the lump sum by the next week. In countries like Malaysia, that money is typically gone in 3 to 4 years. So lump sums are a real issue. There are other things, redistributive factors between rich and poor workers. You see some of that on the right. Some schemes are very redistributive within the scheme, others are not. And for others, it's just simply having higher contribution rates. You're not going to get a decent pension if you're contributing 8% of your salary for your whole life. Next slide, please. I think we're almost there, Reiko. I'm sorry. On fiscal sustainability, I think, as I said at the beginning, by design, DC and NDC schemes are more fiscally sustainable as a rule. So it's mostly about DB. Some of it's compliance, some of it's automatic adjustments. So, for example, about half of OECD countries automatically adjust the withdrawal or retirement age in line with life expectancy increases. There's not a political fight every time they want to change the retirement age, which we all know happens in every other country. So make things automatic, or adjust benefits automatically. And the NDC schemes do this by design and rather nicely. Reserve funds would be another one I would point to, where countries who know they've got a demographic hit coming at them put money aside ahead of time. China's National Social Security Fund is an example of that. Next slide, please. So this is my last slide, you'll be glad to know. I put a chocolate cake here because I'm suggesting a layered approach, and I love chocolate cakes, and the more layers they have, the better as far as I'm concerned. And I think you should think of pension systems like that in the same way, whether you like chocolate cake or whether you like other cakes or whatever. Firstly, I go back to John's presentation yesterday. Have a zero pillar, have a social pension with significant coverage, because we know that coverage of contributory schemes won't get you there in terms of old age financial. Secondly, really get all the formal workers. In most of our countries, they don't get them yet. So get them. You know, compliance, administration, tax authorities and others need to be involved. Third is or second on this list is the contract and other workers with characteristics of formal employment, perhaps with reduced contribution rates, matching schemes, as I've talked about, and consumption-based. But as a final point, I'd say so long as informality remains at 90%, as it does say in South Asia, or 80% in Indonesia or whatever, you're never going to fill that coverage gap. That missing middle will remain. It may be smaller, you may chip away at it, but it will remain. And so that's where you go back to social pensions and the importance of those playing a role in the overall pension system. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip.
Terima kasih, Philip.
Well, exactly keeping the time, but
Tidak tepat
you
waktu
have
ya,
you're the person who
tapi
set the time, and then we
meskipun
could
Anda
have a very
yang
comprehensive
menetapkan batas waktu
overview
untuk
of
masing-masing
pension contributory
pembicara.
pension system
Tapi dengan
in the
ini kita
region.
mendapatkan
And also I was,
gambaran dari
well,
berbagai
I was
skema
happy to
pensiun
know,
di
I was
kawasan ini,
amazed
dan
to
saya
know
sangat
that
senang mendengar
Asia
bahwa
is the most
Asia
diverse
merupakan
pension system.
daerah
Asia is a region where there is the most
berbagai
diverse
ragam
system. Yes, maybe it is true.
sistem
And then
pensiun
also Asia
yang paling
Pacific is the
beragam.
most
Dan untuk Asia
population
Pasifik,
living. So why
ini
not? But
merupakan
then,
kawasan dengan populasi
when
terbesar
we
ya.
talk about
Saat
pension,
kita
then
membicarakan
sometimes we go
pensiun, terkadang
into
kita
very much in detail like DC and DB. So define
bahas
contribution.
hal-hal seperti
What you pay is defined, it is fixed, and then defined benefit when you receive it is the
DC,
fixed
yaitu
amount.
defined
So
contribution
all
gitu ya,
these
juga sudah
jargons
pasti sudah
maybe
ditetapkan.
can
Ini
be
sedikit
clarified later.
akronim atau
So before
jargon,
that, when I
terminologi
start, I
yang
forgot to mention
tidak
about the
umum untuk
structure
semua
of the
orang, tapi
session.
nanti
We
kita
have
bisa
90 minutes.
menjelaskannya.
So now
Sekarang waktu
Philip
kita
gave us the
90
overview,
menit, Philip
and
sudah
then
memberikan
even
gambaran,
including the zero
termasuk
platform with the social pension,
platform
which
nol
we
dengan
moved yesterday.
pensiun
So
sosial
now
yang
we
sudah
are
kita
going
bahas
to
kemarin. Sekarang
first,
kita
second,
akan
fourth,
mendengarkan
third and fourth layers in 3
lapisan
different
kedua,
countries.
ketiga,
So
keempat
now
di 3
the
negara yang berbeda,
China,
yaitu
India,
China,
and
India, dan Indonesia.
made
Untuk
online.
China,
Maybe you can prepare
paparannya
the
disampaikan secara daring, mungkin ini bisa disiapkan terlebih
and
dahulu.
then after that
Dan
there
setelah
will
itu,
be
kita akan menyelenggarakan diskusi
by Philip.
kelompok
Each of you
yang akan
are going to
dijelaskan oleh
discuss.
Philip. Masing-masing antara peserta sini akan berdiskusi dan
the session will be
membuat
by
presentasi.
2 commentators
Kemudian akan
from
ada 2 komentator di antara
and
di sini,
another person,
yaitu John dan
sorry,
mungkin pihak lainnya yang
Ina.
ada secara daring. Ina?
This is the structure. So
Baik,
before
ini
getting too late,
strukturnya. Sebelum
let me
kita
bring
lanjut,
the floor to
kita
Mr.
dengarkan
Dewen
Bapak Dewen
Wang,
Wang, ekonom
economist of
senior
World Bank.
perlindungan sosial
China.
dari Bank Dunia.
So Dewen Wang, you have the floor. Are you there? Dewen, is that he or she? He.
Yes.
Hi.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you
Okay,
and
good.
see you.
So,
Yes, good.
okay,
Thank you.
yeah, I would like to share this the Chinese case by focus on this resident pension. Basically, the pension scheme is for the informal sector workers, for farmers, and also like those people who are employed in the urban area but informally. Like Philip O'Keefe already advocate like China resident pension, so he already mentioned it's a hybrid like social pension and also quite a unique advocate this case. I will want to talk a little bit more based on what he said and try to like present the Chinese case in 8 minutes. Let me try. For my presentation, basically, I will like share with you the design features, how this system, how this scheme looks like. It's like a kind of like a match contribution. Basically, both the central government and also local government actually join to share the cost as using the financial inputs as like incentive to expand the coverage. But I also want to show you how actually the coverage is, has been like expanded very quickly, and also both the coverage and also like the benefit level and also the public like inputs, financial inputs from the government side. And this third point, actually, I want to share with you, like from the empirical side, actually, they already have some evidence to show this kind of scheme already like bring positive impacts, but still, actually, the government can do more. So the last, just summarize like the key message I want to convey from my presentation. So this is how I run my presentation. So in terms of the design of this program, as you can see, it's as people already mentioned, like it's a hybrid like social pension with a matching contribution. Basically, the design has a individual account. That account is like it's a DC. So as Chair already mentioned, we're talking about DC, DB. The individual account is a like a DC. But they do actually for this design, they also have this like a basic pension. The flat pension benefit is a DB. The DB is financed by both the central and also local government. And the target population is the informal sector workers, as I mentioned, as rural urban residents, farmers, and also workers who are employed informally. But the scheme itself is voluntary. It's not compulsory. And also, like for the individual account, basically the contribution is a level of like like this annual kind of connection of the contribution. It's just a one-time connection of the contribution. It's the contribution level ranges like from 100 RMB to like 2,000 RMB. And also to match individual like contribution, the local government actually provided subsidy to this individual account that also like the varies from like 30 to 60 RMB across provinces. Some provinces are even higher. And also for the basic pension, the benefit is financed like for the central and the western like provinces because it's like a lagging region. So the the money is 100% from the central government. But for the developed region, the east region is a rich region. Then both the central and the local government share the cost like equally. So this is how actually the design looks like, and also how actually the money can from to make these to finance the scheme, make it work. And also for the eligibility, both like for women and men, like they like to claim the benefit is like 60 years old, but needs to like contribute like the 15 years. And for the right now for the funds management, particularly for the individual account, it's largely like decentralized and managed by at the county or the provincial level. The quite interesting thing, as people mentioned, why it is unique because like in China, actually, particularly at an early stage, it's like they also introduce a family bonding kind of like a condition. For example, for at the initial stage, if for some like elderly people already reached like 60 years old, they can claim the benefit. But the precondition is that the adult children should make a contribution. Otherwise, the elderly, like even if they reach like 16 years old, they cannot claim the benefit. But over time, basically, the family bonding like actually is not actually a precondition because most of like the adult and already like make contribution. So that how actually family like the bonding like works at this initial stage. But also for the poor and also vulnerable groups, basically the government just pay the individual contribution because they're poor, they do not have money. So that's how actually the contribution rate. This slide shows how this contribution, the coverage expand so very quickly. And but just give you a little bit background why it is expand so quickly, because it's largely driven by the financial incentives on one hand, particularly like the fiscal transfer from the central and also the local government, the matching part, because it provides strong incentives for people to get involved, to participate in the scheme. Because the example is that China actually, if you're talking about this so-called informal, the pension scheme to cover the informal sector, they already started the so-called pilot at the beginning, the 1990s. They actually from decades kind of like a pilot, but the coverage, as you can the figures on the right hand side shows basically quite a circulated over years, just around 70 meaning something like that. But then for started from the year 2009, the central government decided to provide the financial incentives, particularly the government providing the subsidy to both the pension benefit, but also the matching to individual account. So that is actually helps to expand the coverage very quickly, just actually in 3 years. For example, they started from to cover the rural residents in the year 2009, and set a target in the first year 10%, the second year 24%, and then the third year 6%, and then the fourth year 100%. But then after that, they also actually set target to cover the urban areas and within 2 years, and unify this kind of scheme. And one lesson learned from China is that they also mobilize the grassroots organizations, particularly the community and the Windy countries officials, to have the courage to reach out to have the coverage expansion. These figures I just run these figures very quickly already, run the estimates. Basically, the government's the left hand side, the figures show how much money they transfer, or the revenue and also expenditures looks like. But the figure in the middle shows basically, if you look at the revenue perspective, 62% of the money came from the central government. That's why they provide quite a high incentives for people to participate in the scheme. But also the right hand side shows you basically, even if the government has significantly increased the public financial inputs, but that input is also a kind of moderate, because right now expenditure is only account 0.05% of the GDP in the year 2023. But if you look at the total fiscal spending, it's just that it's only account for 1.5% in the year 2003. So over time, China also started to increase the pension, the basic benefit from less than $8 in the year monthly, in the year 2011. Right now, it's monthly is around 30 dollars monthly, in the year 2023. But the benefit is still quite low, because if you look at the per capita income in the rural areas, the pension benefit only account around 12% of the per capita income in the rural area. But if you look at the benefit across provinces, it's a large variation, because the large variation largely comes from the local, they can top up the benefit, and also based on local fiscal capacity and space. For example, in Shanghai, right now the monthly pension benefit it can be 250 US dollar per month, but in the poor region, just still kind of 30 US dollar per month. So there's the variation is huge. But as I mentioned, basically these they are already because studies shows.
One
So this is
So, sorry, we didn't tell you maybe about the time for your presentation, but can you wrap up?
Yes, this is okay, I can wrap up.
Thank you.
This is shows the positive impact that this scheme has bring to the many different dimensions. I just skip this slides. This is the last the slides for the wrap up. Basically, to summarize, what the reason actually has driven the success of the China resident pension scheme is from several reasons: a strong political views, and also a hybrid social pension with strong the financial incentives, and also the family bonding, and also the transfer from both central and local government, and cost sharing between central and local government. And also the government also have this kind of institutional setup. But look at the scheme itself, actually still there are challenges. For example, adequacy issue, pension equality, how to manage the fund in an effective way to reduce the risks. So that's all from my side. Sorry, I just spend maybe 2 more minutes. I just stop here.
Thank you very much. There are one. Actually, the reform of Chinese pension system is so drastic. So you have well explained about the success of rural-urban resident pension, right? RURP. And then also I know that the time you have converged civil servants pension and the regular employers pension converged was the same time around, I think it was around 2012. And then also it was the same time Japan have also converged the system. So you can imagine how quick the China is now moving on for the pension reform. So thank you very much for your first presentation. So now we'd like to move to India. So it will be presented by S.B. Muniraju, Deputy Advisor of National Institution for Transforming India. He's from Delhi, India. So you have the floor.
Thank you, Reiko, and thank you, Philip, for making wonderful presentation on overall structure of Asia Pacific region social protection programs. At the outset, I really congratulate and appreciate the efforts of Asian Development, UNFPA, Helpage International for organizing such a wonderful thinking and themes for identifying discussions on older persons. Yeah, next slide, please. See, in India, what is the mandate? It's like we have derived the mandate from the directive principle of the state policy that is inbuilt in the Constitution of India that guides the states or the government, national government, to make within its economic capacity and development, make effective provisions for securing the right to work, to education, and to public assistance in cases of unemployment, old age, sickness, and disablement. This is the directive which is inbuilt in the Constitution of India that guides national government and also provincial governments to make policies and programs for social protection. Then we have a national policy for older persons, which was adopted in 1999, that enables to ensure good health and social security and economic empowerment of older persons. Then we have a senior citizens welfare fund, which is created in 2016 out of the savings of the unclaimed funds from the banks. So that is an exclusive fund which is created. And of course, India is the signatory to the UN SDGs that guides leaving no one behind. Next slide, please. So we have two major flagship programs, that is Atal Pension Yojana, that covers all citizens of India, irrespective it's unorganized or organized sector, that ensures the minimum of 1,000 rupees pension and also maximum of 5,000 after the retirement, like 60 years is the retirement age. Come to the main program, that is Prime Minister Shram Yogi Mandan Yojana. It is called PM-SIM. It's a voluntary and contributory pension scheme that provides financial security to unorganized workers like street vendors, domestic workers, agriculture workers, construction workers. And this has about 127 types of unorganized occupations that covers, and the central government, the federal government contributes equally to the pension account of the account holders. Next slide, please. Now, what is the eligibility criteria? It's all unorganized sector workers. That scheme is specifically designed for the unorganized workers, including rickshaw pullers, street vendors, domestic workers. there is a monthly income of maximum, it's 15,000, and less than that who are having the monthly income were covered. And of course, age starting from 18 years, 18 years is the working age limit in India, and maximum up to 40 years that covers all the unorganized workers. And the workers should not be engaged in the organized sector. Under this scheme, workers should be remain in the unorganized sector and should not be an income taxpayer and possess an Aadhaar card and savings bank accounts in the banks. Next slide, please. Now, what is the key features? Like assured pension, this scheme guarantees minimum assured pension of 3,000 per month after the subscriber attains. Oh, family pension, it also covers the family pensions, and this is again, it's a contributory. And of course, flexibility is given to exit from the scheme. Next slide, please. So fund management and pension payout is a fund management is a central sector scheme handled by the Ministry of Labor and Employment, and fund is managed by Life Insurance Corporation of India, which is the one of the organized organization which manages the funding. And pension claims are made through LIC, and pension payout after attaining the age of 60 years, subscribers will receive their assured monthly pension. Next slide, please. Through DBT method, that is direct cash transfer to the account holders. And exit and withdrawal, exit before 10 years, like anyone can exit from the scheme. And also in case of death, spouse can continue to exit with the contribution plus interest. In case of disability, spouse can continue to exit. And also post-death subscriber spouse, entire corpus will be returned to pension fund, that will be savings and will be given to the unorganized workers again as a senior citizen welfare fund. Current status, India has rapidly increased since 2000. By 2023, we have about more than 29.27 crore unorganized workers have been registered under eShram portal, and they're all covered under the PM-SIM program. Next slide, please. So if there is any grievances of the individual who are enrolled under the scheme, we have an institutional grievance redressal mechanism that facilitates and provides guidance to the grievance holders. Next slide. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Paul. And sorry for the short time. There are so many things to talk, but due to the time constraints. So let's move to Indonesia. It will be presented by Dr. Muhammad Shorifihani, if I pronounce well, and who is the Director of Population and Social Security of Ministry of National Development Planning, Bappenas. So, Muhammad, you have the floor.
Yes. Thank you, Hayashi. First of all, I have the 6th slide. Hopefully, in the 8 minutes later, I may finish everything. My name is Muhammad Khalifihani. I'm the Director for Population and Social Security, and currently I will talking about the implementation of contributory social security in terms of pension and health. Next. Actually, we have the two schemes of our social security. Next slide, please. The first one in the non-contributory scheme is only for the poverty people under poverty line. Currently, we have the 9% of poverty rate and around 25 million under poverty. That's why government gave them subsidy, but only for national health insurance. And the other one is contributory scheme for all the people in Indonesia. We have the sick totally in the scheme. In terms of the accident, we have the work accident insurance, death insurance, old age benefit, pension program, and also unemployment insurance. For the pension scheme, we have two benefits: old age benefit, GHT, and also pension program. That's the scheme in our Indonesian program for the national social security system under the law. Next slide, please. And here is the rate. The rate actually for the health insurance is only 5%. Employer 4%, worker 1%. And for the employment security, employment insurance, totally is around the 6 to 8 to the 7%. in total for health and also employment insurance, including pension inclusion, is around 15 to 16, still small. That our contribution rate in Indonesia. Of course, for the non-worker segmentation, they have to pay by themselves. Something like this. Next slide, please. And then here is the implementation. In terms of the health insurance, we are now under have to be fulfill universal health coverage, because more than almost all the people in Indonesia have get the health insurance. Is around the 97%. However, we have the constraint. How we can make it them still the active to pay, because we have the less than around the 20%, around of the 75% is have to make it them active to pay the premium. The other one is how we can make it them more access to healthcare, and then you also mentioned Philip about the how we can make it coverage is increased, something like that, and also socialization about the health insurance. Next slide, please. 3 more slide. Here is the pension. The pension scheme currently under the universal, because total of the our coverage for the employment worker is only less than 40%. And then the constraint and the challenge is how we make it them to pay, particularly including the informal sector. Informal sector is our, I think, is our also challenge for the next year, for the next 5 years. That so you can look here, our pension program is only for wage worker. Non-wage worker is still not included in our law. And then the coverage, I said before, less than 40%. And also we have 2 old age benefit. It is the lump sum. It is the saving for the people. Then, but they have to pay regularly at least 15 years to pay the old age benefit. And then the other one, pension system reform. Pension system reform is our reform for the next year, starting next year until 20 years. We have to fulfill ILO scheme for the 40%. Next slide, please. Here is the our policy and also our reform. Our policy in the 20 year ahead is how we make it the all social security is adaptive. We say that adaptive social protection policy. And then we have the target to fulfill the health insurance is of course almost the 100%, and also employment social security. We have the 85% in 2024. Why? Because we have critical problem with the informal sector. And then here is the condition for the next 20 years. Out of pocket is still high, low illiteracy for social security, also participation for informal worker is still our challenge, and also compliant. Here is the right hand side, low compliant contribution payment is also our thinking about our homework. And then finally, here is our reform. Next slide, please, the last slide. Our reform is how we make reform Indonesia for pension is in terms of program sustainability and in terms of adequate benefit. In terms of program sustainability, so of course, we currently thinking and also currently the study how we make it independent national actuarial institution. We have to establish something like this. Then gradually increase the contribution. Here's our idea to pay as you go scheme, increasing literacy, promote incentive, disincentive strategies, and then the portability scheme. Yeah, it's important. Why? Because when the shifting of formal and informal worker, and then they can making the contribution density through contribution year. This is also our challenge. And also, of course, adequate benefit. How we harmonize cash benefit receive pension age, and then of course we have the target in the 40% replacement rate under ILO scheme, and the other one, increasing pension benefit through rising accrual rate for the annual benefit. That's our reform for the starting next year and then 20 years. That's all my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Muhammad, to keep within the time frame. And so now the challenge is for the informal worker, and then how to join, how to combine the floor zero and then maybe floor upper, and then maybe it is now, but now we understand that you are moving forward. So we would like to enjoy this opportunity that so many people from the country get together to have the table sessions. So Philip is going to explain what you are going to talk.
Thank you. Could we put up that one, the single slide one? We're going to do something a little different. This was Eduardo was encouraging us. He said you'd all have death by PowerPoint in this point in the thing, and I'm sure you feel exactly like you've been slapped around the face probably with lots of PowerPoint. So what we're going to do is at each of the 6 tables here, and if those on the side, if you could join a table, is just there's an extra slide there, I think, we're just going to have 2 questions and talk for 10 minutes in your group, very informally. I hope we'll be able to put the 2 questions up on the screen here. Oh, they're there. Okay. So there you are. So in your table, for your country, in your group, what are the 2 or 3 biggest challenges you face with your national pension systems? And that would cover contributory and non-contributory, and they may be coverage, adequacy, whatever you see. Could be corruption, who knows? And then on the more positive side, looking ahead, what are the opportunities and mechanisms that you think can help address these 2 or 3 major issues? What we'd like at each table is that somebody agrees to report back to the group. So we're going to have 10 minutes in the group. It's very quick fire. And then a 1 to 2 minute report back from each group where you just stand up and say, these are the 2 or 3 key things, or, we had very diverse things, and these are the 2 or 3 things we think can improve the situation. So I know it's a bit of a gamble to do this, but those on the side, if you could please join one table, maybe the tables that have fewer people on them, and we'll give you 10 minutes from now. So we'll at 12:12, we will come back and then just have 1 minute, very snapshot summary from each of the tables. And then we'll have a summary from John Piggott and Ina Mulyati from Indonesia. Okay, so over to you for 10 minutes, and we'll give you a warning with 2 minutes to go. Thank you, Manaraja. You did you were very disciplined on that. More than you two were both more disciplined. No, that was great. I thank you to both of you. You covered a lot of ground and very efficient. Oh, but I was too long. Bringing them into the it also, they do it kind of it sets up that if they do become later, hybrid, whatever you want to call it, yeah, it's a weird one. You're doing, I mean, so you and John are both. I was just saying. Very long. Over. None of these. They look kind of formal. 2 minutes. I see one table abandon us. That was a smart tactic. And each group, if you can nominate somebody just to summarise what was said in a minute or two, that'd be great. Voluntary to Indonesia or India or voluntary or else. Okay, let's come back to the group then. So which table would like to lead us off, just with their very snapshot of what was discussed? Who wants the gold medal? Since it's Olympic year. Okay, Peter what? Did Thailand win any gold medals in the Olympics? Okay, good. Well, this can be the next gold medal for Thailand. Yeah.
I think it's easiest to go first. So this table represents the Philippines, Indonesia, and Thailand. I'll just pick out some common themes that we have. The first one is that it's the connectedness between formal and informal. People jump a lot from formal and informal, and we don't have existing structure that serve this transition. Like if you were in the formal, you accumulate some pension. If you left formal sector to become informal, usually your contribution just stops. So I think one solution for that is to design or to allow people to keep contributing, even though you don't have employer. You can keep contributing, and you just like have, I don't know, like proportionate accumulation of benefit. The second theme that arise through all three countries is the heterogeneity between regions within the country. For example, I think it's very acute in Indonesia, where rural area don't aware of the informal schemes, and maybe the structure of informal scheme does not support people in rural area. So we need to think more about how to raise awareness of, in Thailand as well, like if you are farmers in very remote area, you are not quite aware that there are these systems that serve them. And this is actually the reason that we have the social pension that is universal, because we try to have some type of opt-in system, but it ended up with very large exclusion error because we have people just don't know that they can opt into the system to get it. But if you give it to everyone, then you just less exclusionary. And there are other issues like in my case, fragmentation, large informality, of course. So I think I'll just leave it there.
Next table, silver medalist. Okay.
I can speak from the experience in my country. I am economic advisor in Ministry of Rural Development. We administer National Social Assistance Program. Yes. So under this program, we give pensions to old age people, to widows above 40 years, disabled persons. So the national cap is 3 crore or 30 million to whom the central government provides pension. So this is coverage is a challenge. So that is why the states are allowed to give from their own resources to other eligible beneficiaries, and the eligibility is below poverty line. So state additionally give benefits to around 6 crore persons. They give benefits to 6 crore. So in India, in total, we give pensions to 9 crore people. And the amount which central government gives, the states are encouraged to give at least that much amount of top-up. But some of the states give a large amount of top-up, and some states give the little top-up. So there is a difference in that area. But all states do give some amount of top-up so that the beneficiaries get a dignified amount of basic assistance. And to prevent any kind of pilferage or corruption, about the pensions are dispersed through DBT. So at least 97% of the pensioners get their benefits through DBT, and there is one state like Andhra Pradesh, which through cash vending machine they go door to door to deliver the pension, and there the satisfaction level of beneficiaries is very high. And to ensure sustainability, these are all funded through budget allocations by the center and the states. So the challenges have been adequately addressed. Thank you.
For those who don't know Indian numbers, crores are 10 million. So 9 crore would be 90 million, is that right? If I remember, yeah.
And I think one of the things that I did not hear today is to talk about the behavioral change. I think that is one thing which is lacking amongst the citizen. I mean, honestly, there's a role for a government to do, but as a citizen also there is a role and responsibility. And I think in all our conversation we miss that part of the discussion, where what is the role of the citizen, because there's only so much capacity that the government has and government can do. As a citizen also they are responsible to do something. Just wanted to add.
You want to? Okay, thank you very much. I will be presenting the challenges as shared by the different countries. So for India, the challenge is, of course, the lack of information and awareness. And accordingly, people are not aware that they're entitled to such pension. And some of them do not receive this pension. And with respect to Laos, I think similar din concern. They have similar concern on the information or lack of awareness of the people who are supposed to be benefiting from this pension scheme. And particularly for the older person, Laos does not have yet an existing program that specifically covers them. But they have covered the informal sector for the non-contributory social pension. And the challenges that they're facing are, of course, resulting from the inaccessibility of services, as well as it was also mentioned that there's no ATM where they can access the withdrawal of this pension. For Thailand, I think the same then for the two countries. Awareness is a challenge. And for the informal sector, there's the attitude of not saving it. They want to expend it today because of the money that they need for daily sustenance. And it's quite challenging to encourage them to participate to this pension scheme of contributing to this system that is in place. And in the Philippines, we also have our social pension for older persons, and as well as the contributory pension for those that are formally employed, being provided by, of course, for the private sector. This is provided by the Social Security system. For the government sector, these are, of course, provided by the government service insurance system. And there is now a talk to cover also the informal sector by the Social Security system in the Philippines. So we're looking forward that the appropriate policy and mechanism can be established on that. So for the challenges, of course, as mentioned, there is a challenge on how to design a contributory system that will cover the gaps, those that are not being addressed by the non-contributory, existing non-contributory pension scheme, as well as the contributory pension scheme. And clearly, as I have mentioned, awareness is a challenge. So we need to increase awareness through the government and other stakeholders that are working in ensuring that people are aware that they can also secure their future by contributing whether to the mandatory contributory system for formal sector as well as the informal sector. And perhaps, of course, a special awareness should be also made to cover older persons. And another thing is to ensure that the participation to these pension schemes, whether contributory or non-contributory, should be accessible to all concerned. So the government, together with other stakeholders, should ensure that appropriate information are disseminated, the how-tos on how to contribute, to participate, and know the benefits of being part of these pension systems are made part of daily engagement to all concerned. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm shared the challenges the pension system in Korea. So the biggest issue is actually the fiscal sustainability. As Philip mentioned, we have very low rate of contribution rate. So it's 9%, I think. So yeah, it's financially, I think it's not sustainable. So just last week, the government, they proposed a pension reform proposal to the assembly, but I think the biggest issue, one debate is intergenerational issue, I think. So younger generation, they does not want to increase the contribution rate, of course, but the older generation always talk about the adequacy issues. So the higher replacement rate. So our concern is how to reach agreement politically between the younger generation and older generation. So I really want to hear from the other countries' cases how to figure out this political negotiation and agreement process. Thank you.
Okay, I am gonna share two interesting one for Indonesia because I come from Singapore, South Foundation, but we work with a National Federation of Women here, and who realized at some point that their membership are actually growing older and they have no social protection at all in the community. But they are working as, they have a very strong cooperative at the federation level. So one of the things they realized when we did the financial literacy program with them is that they need to have a social protection at the community level. So one of the things they instituted is an old age pension at the community level, at the cooperative level. And as a national federation, that could be something substantial because there are 7 provinces. So one of the things I've been encouraging them, can you negotiate with the bank or with the private sector to then bring those savings, pooled savings, to give you a better rate of return so that then there could be compounding interest. So that's one. I have not, but it's still, they've managed to institutionalize it at the cooperative level. So I don't know how it is connected, and maybe that's one of the challenge. I don't know if it's connected with what you are sharing. The other side of that is the health insurance coverage. Because 2 biggest is if these women become ill, their source of income to a large extent is also going to be affected. So to me, the 2 twins are always that old age insurance coverage as well as the health insurance coverage. And I think in Singapore, there's actually a very interesting policy advocacy that we managed to convince the government. It's about match retirement savings. They package it for everybody, and it could come from anybody. It could come from your neighbor or from the community. For a year, you get a letter from the government because we're a defined contribution. Individual accounts, you get a letter. If you haven't reached a minimum sum to be able to retire adequately in Singapore, you get a letter from the government and saying that you're eligible to this. If you save 600, the government will top up 600. It will increase to $2,000 2 years from. But what's interesting here is although it's offered for everybody, so politically it's not going to be an issue, you know that a lot of these eligible are actually women. So it's a very interesting way of packaging it so that then it's not going to be politically like pitting men and against women. So that's a second interesting. The third one, the solution, there's 2 solutions, regarding how unsustainable fiscal. I don't know why we haven't really tapped on the power of the community in terms of having conversations around at your community level, who's covered and who's not covered. And what could be, how can we leverage on each other to be able to put some of these protection measures at the community level and make decisions accordingly. And then negotiate with whoever, either your local government or whatever. You could bring it to the national level by not voting to your MP or whatever it is. But I think we haven't. So the other part that is not tapped yet is the private sector. This private sector, as I've always, I said, why don't you come to the rural bank and then say, you know, I have 5,000 members of women, we save this much. If we save this much every month, what return would you give me that's better than what I have? Because I won't be able to give that in the cooperative, but if you negotiate with the bank, is there incentive from the national government to then put like either a tax incentive for the banks who then offer this kind of better rates so that they can invest it or whatever? There's so many mechanisms we haven't tapped private sector in this. That's why it's always unsustainable. I'm like, it's a very logical, and to me it's a very, there are solutions that we haven't tapped. Community or conversations are difficult conversations between intergenerations, conversation, as well as the private sector. Thank you.
Just very briefly on Nepal, situation in Nepal. So as Philip pointed out, the is one of the lowest countries in the region regarding pension coverage. However, this is public sector specifically, but there is actually 4,000 rupees pension for senior citizens over age 68, and also there's a informal sector social security fund. Despite in saying that, though, aging, it's now over 10% in the country aged over 60, which is obviously increasing. and there's serious sustainability issues around pension systems because there's no formal system in place for the private sector, or for the informal sector. Informal sectors covering around 40% of the economy, and remittances are actually 26% of GDP, largely relied upon for consumption, which is sustaining the older person's income. So there's major system gaps that need to be addressed, and we're currently working on national transfer accounts for that purpose.
So you were talking about Nepal?
Nepal,
okay,
yes.
Okay. So thank you very much. I think that all the tables have made their presentations. So as the time is limited, but it was very interesting comments you had, and then my observation once Susanna mentioned about the link between pension and health insurance. That is one thing which is also important, because yesterday in the social pension session, that why we have pension not for young people, basic income, because the older people cannot work, and then during the time you need the pension. In that case, if you are 60s, you can work. Then in that case, what's the need for the pension, or what is the rationale of the pension according to the country context? And then pension is one of the oldest social protection scheme, and then sometimes we take it for granted, but with this emerging aging situation in Asia, maybe we can rethink about what to make contributory pension or social pension, and also how to link with healthcare insurance or long-term care insurance, and so on and so forth. But anyway, if I talk too long, I should not talk. And then, is there any very urgent questions? If you don't, you have one question.
It's a burning question for countries like Indonesia. And maybe I'm blunt to my host, but Indonesia is a country that has a very low contributory coverage, yes? Through the years has not been much expansion, although you need to continue exploring. But the non-contributory pension, Indonesia is one of the few countries that has been very, I would say, lacking the political will to develop a broad non-contributory pension, and we have seen the benefits of non-contributory pensions not only for the populations. It should not be seen as welfare, but as contributions to development, really to development, human resources, human capital, different generations, local economies. Of course, you need to watch the adequacy, the design, build the scenarios of affordability and all that. But maybe the new Indonesian government can develop the will and the experience, especially after the session yesterday that, was seen the benefit. And one last point, in many countries talk about social pensions with a very targeted schemes, namely Bangladesh, for example. The errors of inclusion and the errors of exclusion of that type of scheme are enormous, huge, especially when you have weak administrative systems, etc. So the universal schemes or the pensions tested schemes like Thailand, for example, are a way forward. Yes. So my heart is with Indonesia if you build that political will.
So if you want to respond, well, you just say yes, you have the will. So this session is going to be ended by two commentators to make the summary. First is Professor John Pigot. You can conclude the summary in 5 minutes. It will be followed by Len Muliati in the end. Yes.
Thank you very much. It's been a fascinating session. I've really appreciated the presentations of my fellow panelists, and especially Pip, and also the contributions from the tables. I learned quite a lot in the last hour and a half. I wanted to bring the two sessions together, yesterday's and today's, and just think a little bit about attitudes and some caveats when it comes to overall retirement system protection and design. I talked yesterday about social pensions. And I think my impression a little bit is that policymakers come to social pensions as a kind of last-ditch rescue, right? So they really would like contributory pensions to be everything, and so that you begin with that, and then that actually doesn't work very well, particularly in the emerging economies of Asia. And then you end up with oh, well, we better do something, right? And there's a bit of a band-aid, which is the social pension. And I think really that's the wrong way to think about it. I think social pensions should have salience and importance. And an implication of that is that they need a lot of thought to go into their design and application. So it's not something, oh, well, you know, we only need that for a few years and then we'll be formal and then we won't need it anymore. I don't think that's the attitude to have. It's there for keeps, and it's got to be designed in a way that's both effective and sustainable, and that's not a straightforward thing to do. And its characteristics will vary with the circumstances of the country. It won't be one size fits all. So it needs thought. So that's the first thing I wanted to say. Something I missed saying yesterday was that in terms of keeping it affordable, we didn't discuss at all the unit that might be addressed. And so I mentioned, I think I listed 28% of average earnings for Australia, but if you're a couple, we call them income units, not couples, but if you're an income unit, then the rate is 40% for the two, because two can live more cheaply than one. That's an immediate saving if you have the records and the ability to make that distinction. So that's the first point I want to make. And then I wanted to talk just a little bit about the contributory scheme. 2 minutes? Yeah. The contributory schemes, because there are two aspects to those. You can go two ways or a mix. And the first way is to rely on current contributions to fund and finance current benefits, which pay-as-you-go scheme. And that's what the OECD did, with the exception of Australia and New Zealand. And the developed countries are now kind of scrambling because the Social Security contribution rates that are required to fund the currently burgeoning retired become very high. And so, for example, Japan, which is a developed nation in this region, half the basic pension now comes from a consumption tax, a general revenue tax. And that's going to increasingly be the case. So it's kind of like a social pension by stealth. And I think the affordability and sustainability of the contributory pensions, if they're designed like that, is something you need to bear in mind. And it's not like that's the best solution, because if fertility stays low and is lowering in the way that some people predict, and I guess I agree with that, although it may be wrong, right? Then that's going to be an issue. And then the second point I wanted to make is that if you go the other way and you say, well, what we'll do is we'll pre-fund, which is what Australia has done, it's what Switzerland has done, it's what the Netherlands has done, a few countries have done that, then you need to have very robust governance, because essentially what you're asking is for a financial system to look after your savings for 4 decades. And that's a big ask. And you need to be thoughtful about that as well, and see how that develops. Because even in Australia, there have been a number of cases of malice and of inadvertence, which messes that up. So all of this requires care and thought, and that's what I would leave you with. Social pensions having salience, but the whole system requiring a lot of consideration in its further development. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So in the end, Ian Muliati, please conclude with with your summary. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Please remind me if I already have for 5 minutes. Usually I forgot the time. So thank you very much. I think it's very interesting discussion. It's following yesterday's discussion as well. Key point that I think when I was listening since morning, right? One thing that I think a little bit missing when we talk about the pension, usually we just fall under the category pension. That's it, right? And then we think from that pension category, but we never really look into the ecosystem that's supporting the pension itself, right? The future income protection. So we have to take a look at from the technical perspective, operational perspective, then and of course institutional perspective, right? And then when I listened since morning and since yesterday, it seems just like I agree with John. It seems like social pension is just like afterthought program, right? If everything doesn't work, then go to the social pension. That's not supposed to be like that, right? So that's why I think the planning of, this is the Ministry of Planning maybe on each country is very critical. So we have to really put it, what kind of the society or what kind of the country that you would like to have in future, right? So it's like a forward-thinking strategy that every country should have. And then you map it whether, what is the possibility of the internal and also external changes in terms of the environment. Why it is very important, for example, in some country, we know that during the pandemic, right, everything changed. Even the employment model changed. Usually people go to the formal sector. But during the pandemic and after the pandemic, people really like to work everywhere, being a consultant, etc. In most countries, if being consultant, you fall under the informal sector job. So that's why when we think about the pension, maybe we also need to take a look the pension from the different perspective, because the world and the environmental change. So the country also need to think like that. I agree with what Pip said in the slide, right? The multi-pillar actually is a way to go. And I think hearing from the floor, most countries actually already applying the multi-pillar system here. So many layering of the system. But I think the issue is one system doesn't really talk with the other system. It's becoming layer by layer, but don't really merging in terms of the strategy or in terms of the political intervention from the government. That's also the problem. So how we make sure that the multi-pillar system and multi-pillar strategy that implemented by the government, in some countries they already implemented, they have to talk to each other. I understand that even the agency that managing that system is also different, right? That may not necessarily be coordinating with each other. So that's also source of the problem. So I think again, the communication, coordination are also key. If we are talking about the pension, it's not only pension in terms of the pension. Future financial protection of the aging population also may depend or may also be solved by other government program outside the pension. For example, for the health, right? That's maybe under the Ministry of Health, not the Ministry of Social Affairs or Labor Solidarity. Or maybe if you talk about the access for these elderly people, maybe that's under the Ministry of Public Services, etc. So we have to reach out. So that means that the policymaker in each country have to think comprehensively, broadly. So when we talk about the pension, it's not only about how much the benefit they should have, but we also need to think about, again, the life cycle, right? The people's need and people's right. So I think that's the perspective that I think we really need to take a look for this one. And when we talk about the contributory, et cetera, right? At the end, and we listen from the country experience here, even for the contributory system, right? Either DB or DC, at the end, if we want to make sure that people will have something for the longer term, right? They will convert the DC to become quote unquote DB by buying annuity, right? Now, if we are talking about the annuity, we will be talking about the operational perspective. Are there many companies or firms that also can provide the annuity product in the country? So it's really a very complex issue. I think that's the thing that I would like to share in this one. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ian. It was just 5 minutes. So anyway, we are already taking some time of lunch, but we would like to end this session. Thank you very much for your participation. Thank you.
Sorry.